The scream tore through the Colorado wilderness like a wounded animal, and Owen Kincaid froze mid-step on the rocky trail, his hand instinctively moving to the rifle slung across his broad back. He had been tracking elk through the mountains above Georgetown for 3 days, living as he always did in the spaces between civilization and wild country. But that sound was unmistakably human, and filled with such raw agony that his heart kicked hard against his ribs. Without thinking, he changed direction, his powerful legs carrying him swiftly through the dense pine forest toward the source of that terrible cry. Owen was not a man who sought out company. At 28 years old, he had spent the better part of the last decade in these mountains, his only companions the animals he hunted and the howling wind that swept down from the peaks. He stood well over 6 feet tall, with shoulders broad enough to carry a full-grown deer and arms thick with muscle from years of chopping wood, hauling water, and wrestling with the unforgiving wilderness. His dark hair hung past his collar, often tied back with a strip of leather when he worked, and his face was weathered and tanned from constant exposure to the elements. He preferred solitude, had carved out a life in a sturdy cabin he had built with his own hands 5 miles from the nearest settlement, and generally kept to himself, except for the occasional trip to town for supplies. But he could not ignore that scream. He crashed through the underbrush, heedless now of stealth, following the sound to a small clearing where a canvas-covered wagon sat tilted at an awkward angle, one wheel broken clean off. The horses were gone, probably spooked and run off, and everything about the scene spoke of disaster. Another cry came from inside the wagon, and Owen did not hesitate. He pulled himself up and threw back the canvas flap, then stopped dead at the sight before him. A young woman lay on a pile of blankets, her face pale and slick with sweat, her dark blonde hair plastered to her forehead. Her dress was hiked up around her thighs, and even in his shock, Owen understood immediately what was happening. She was giving birth, alone and in obvious distress, her hands clutching at the blankets beneath her as another contraction seized her body. Her eyes flew open at the intrusion, wide with fear and pain, and for a moment they simply stared at each other. She could not have been more than 22 or 23, with delicate features that might have been pretty under different circumstances, and eyes the color of storm clouds. Those eyes took him in, this massive stranger with his wild hair and buckskins, and he saw the terror flicker across her face before another wave of pain consumed her attention. "Please," she gasped out between clenched teeth. "Please help me." Owen had delivered foals and calves, had even helped a neighbor's wife through a difficult birth years ago when he was still living closer to civilization. But this was different. This woman was utterly alone, clearly at the end of her strength and looking at him like he was either her salvation or her doom. He made his decision in an instant. "I am going to help you," he said, his voice rough from disuse but steady. "My name is Owen. What is yours?" "Sarah," she managed. "Sarah Owens. The baby is coming too fast. I cannot do this alone." "You are not alone anymore." He moved quickly, assessing the situation with the same practical efficiency he brought to everything in his life. The wagon was cramped but relatively clean, and it appeared she had been preparing for this, with clean linen stacked nearby and a basin of water, though it had long since gone cold. He could see she had been traveling alone, which raised a dozen questions he had no time to ask. "How long have you been laboring?" "Since yesterday morning," Sarah said, and Owen felt his jaw tighten. That was far too long. "The pain started and the horses got spooked by a bear and ran off with the wheel hitting a rock. I tried to walk, but I could not make it far before the pains got worse." "All right," Owen said, rolling up his sleeves. I need to check how far along you are. This is going to be uncomfortable, but I have to know what we are dealing with." Sarah nodded, too exhausted to protest, and Owen did his best to preserve her modesty while making a quick examination. What he found made his blood run cold. The baby was coming, all right, but something was wrong. The position was not right, and Sarah was bleeding more than she should be. He had no medical training beyond basic frontier knowledge, but he knew enough to understand that both mother and child were in danger if he did not act fast. "The baby needs to come now," he told her, keeping his voice calm despite the urgency thundering through his veins. "On the next contraction, I need you to push with everything you have. You understand?" "I have been pushing," Sarah cried, tears streaming down her face. "I have been pushing for hours and nothing is working. I know, but I am here now and I am going to help." Owen positioned himself, his large hands surprisingly gentle as he prepared to guide the baby. "You are strong, Sarah. I can see that. You have made it this far on your own, which means you are one of the toughest women I have ever met, but you need to find just a little more strength. Can you do that for me? Can you do it for your baby?" Something in his words seemed to reach her. She met his eyes again, and this time he saw determination kindle in that stormy gaze. When the next contraction came, she bore down with a guttural cry that echoed through the wagon, and Owen worked with careful urgency to help the baby along. He could feel the tiny skull beneath his fingers, could sense the delicate life struggling to enter the world, and something fierce and protective surged through him. "That is it," he encouraged. "Again, just like that." They worked together through contraction after contraction, Sarah pushing until she was hoarse from screaming, Owen doing everything he could to ease the baby's passage. Sweat dripped down his face despite the cool mountain air, and his muscles ached from the tension of holding his position in the cramped space. But he did not let himself think about anything except getting this baby safely delivered. Finally, after what felt like hours but was probably only 20 minutes, he felt the baby's head crown. "Almost there," he said, his voice tight with concentration. "One more big push, Sarah. Give me everything you have left." Sarah gathered herself for one final effort, her face contorted with pain and determination, and pushed with a strength that seemed impossible given how long she had been laboring. The baby slipped free into Owen's waiting hands, tiny and slick and utterly still, and for one terrible moment his heart stopped. Then he cleared the infant's nose and mouth with his fingers, rubbed the small chest vigorously with a clean cloth, and was rewarded with a sputtering cough followed by an indignant wail. The sound was the most beautiful thing he had ever heard. "You have a son," Owen said, his voice rough with emotion he did not fully understand. He wrapped the baby quickly in a clean blanket and held him up for Sarah to see. A healthy baby boy. Sarah reached for her child with shaking hands, and Owen placed the tiny bundle carefully on her chest. He dealt with the afterbirth efficiently, trying to give her some privacy now that the immediate crisis had passed, and was relieved to see that the bleeding was slowing to a normal level. Against all odds, they had both survived. "Thank you," Sarah whispered, staring down at her son with wonder and exhaustion in her eyes. The baby had stopped crying and was making little snuffling sounds against her breast, already rooting around for food. "I thought we were both going to die out here. Thank you for saving us." Owen did not know what to say to that. He was not accustomed to gratitude, or to emotional conversations, or to any of this. He busied himself cleaning up, heating water over a small fire he built just outside the wagon, bringing her fresh cloths and water to drink. Sarah managed to get the baby to nurse, and Owen tried not to stare at the tender scene they made. Mother and child bonded together in the aftermath of their ordeal. As the adrenaline faded, Questions crowded his mind. What was a young woman doing traveling alone through the mountains in her final weeks of pregnancy? Where had she been going? Where was the baby's father? But Sarah's eyes were already drooping with exhaustion, and he decided those questions could wait. "You need to rest," he told her. "I am going to see about fixing that wheel and tracking down your horses." "They will be long gone by now," Sarah said sadly. "They were already half wild, barely broke to harness. The man I bought them from probably cheated me." Owen grunted. That did not surprise him. A woman traveling alone would be an easy target for an unscrupulous trader. "I will see what I can do. You just rest and take care of that little one." He climbed out of the wagon, and the late afternoon sun hit him like a physical blow after the dimness inside. He realized he was trembling slightly, the aftermath of fear and exertion, and he took a moment to simply breathe in the clean mountain air. What had he just stumbled into? He had left his cabin this morning thinking about nothing more complicated than bringing down an elk, and now he had helped bring a new life into the world. The broken wheel was a clean break, which was both good and bad. Good because it could be repaired, bad because it would take time and tools he did not have with him. Owen studied the wagon thoughtfully, his mind already working through the practical problems. The nearest town was Georgetown, about 8 miles northeast through difficult terrain. His own cabin was 5 miles almost due west, accessible by a trail too rough for a wagon but manageable on foot or horseback. He could not leave Sarah and the baby here alone overnight, not with bears and mountain lions prowling these hills. But he also could not carry both of them plus their supplies back to his cabin in one trip. He was strong, but he was not superhuman. The sound of a horse nickering made him turn sharply. To his surprise, one of the missing horses had wandered back, probably drawn by the familiar scent of the wagon. It was a rangy roan gelding with nervous eyes, but it let Owen approach and catch its trailing reins. One horse was better than none. He spent the next hour making camp properly, using supplies from Sarah's wagon and his own gear. He built up the fire, hobbled the horse where it could graze, and hunted through her provisions to find something he could cook for dinner. She had a decent store of dried beans and salt pork, flour and coffee, the kind of staples any traveler would carry. He also found baby clothes, carefully sewn by hand, and a few items that suggested Sarah had been planning to settle somewhere and make a life for herself and her child. As dusk settled over the mountains, he made a simple stew and strong coffee. The smell of food roused Sarah from her exhausted sleep, and Owen helped her sit up carefully, bringing her a bowl and a cup. She ate ravenously, and he found himself watching the way the firelight played across her features, gentling the lines of pain and exhaustion. "You must think I am foolish," she said quietly, not meeting his eyes. "Traveling alone in my condition." "I think you are brave," Owen replied, surprising himself with the honesty in his voice. Foolish and brave often look the same from the outside. That earned him a small smile, the first he had seen from her. It transformed her face, made her look younger and more vulnerable. "My husband died 3 months ago," she said, the words coming haltingly as if she had not spoken them aloud before. "Pneumonia." We had been traveling to Colorado to meet up with his brother, who supposedly had land and opportunity waiting. After he died, I had nothing left back in Missouri. His parents blamed me, said I had brought bad luck on their son, so I decided to continue on alone. I thought if I could just make it to Georgetown, I could find his brother and he might help us. The baby was not supposed to come for another 2 weeks. Owen absorbed this information silently. He knew better than most how quickly circumstances could turn deadly on the frontier, how a single bad decision or stroke of bad luck could cost someone everything. What is his brother's name? Thomas Owens. He was supposed to be working at one of the mines in Georgetown. Sarah's expression grew troubled. But I do not actually know if he is still there or if he even exists. My husband had not heard from him in over a year. That complicated matters. Owen finished his own stew, thinking, "You and the baby need to rest for at least a few days before you can travel anywhere. That was a hard birth and you lost blood. You need to regain your strength." "I cannot impose on you," Sarah protested weakly. "You have already done so much. You are not imposing. I am telling you what needs to happen." Owen's voice was firm but not unkind. "My cabin is about 5 miles west of here. It is rough but solid and you will be safe there. Tomorrow I will take you and the baby there, then come back for your wagon and supplies. In a few days, when you are stronger, we can talk about what comes next." Sarah looked like she wanted to argue, but exhaustion won out. "All right," she whispered. "Thank you, Owen. I do not know how I will ever repay you. You do not owe me anything." He stood and began banking the fire. "Get some sleep. Morning comes early in the mountains." He settled himself on the ground near the wagon, his rifle close at hand, and listened to the sounds of the night. Inside the wagon, he could hear Sarah humming softly to her baby, a gentle melody that spoke of love and hope, despite everything she had endured. Something in that sound made his chest ache in a way he did not entirely understand. Owen had lived alone for so long that he had almost forgotten what it felt like to be responsible for someone else. After his parents had died in a cholera outbreak when he was 18, he had drifted west, working odd jobs and learning to survive in the wilderness. He had made a few friends over the years, had even courted a girl once in a mining camp, but nothing had ever stuck. He was too rough, too comfortable with solitude, too much a creature of the mountains. The idea of settling down, of having a family, had seemed as distant and unlikely as the stars wheeling overhead. But tonight, lying under those same stars with a new mother and infant sleeping a few feet away, he felt something shift in his chest. Some part of him that had been dormant for years was stirring to life, called forth by Sarah's courage and her baby's helpless cries. He did not have words for it yet, but he recognized it as important, as the beginning of something that would change him forever. Morning came gray and cold, with mist hanging low in the trees. Owen woke before dawn, as he always did, and rekindled the fire to make coffee and heat water for Sarah. When she emerged from the wagon, moving stiffly and clearly in pain, he had porridge ready and insisted she eat before they did anything else. "How is the little one?" he asked, nodding at the bundle in her arms. "Hungry and loud," Sarah said, but her smile was fond. "I have not even given him a proper name yet. Everything happened so fast. You will have time now." Owen finished his coffee and stood. "I am going to rig up a carrier so you can ride the horse while holding the baby. It is not going to be comfortable, but it is better than walking." He was as good as his word, fashioning a sort of sling from blankets that would support Sarah in the saddle and allow her to keep the baby secure against her chest. When everything was ready, he lifted her up onto the horse with a gentleness that seemed at odds with his massive frame, and she gasped slightly at the strength in his arms. The journey to his cabin took most of the morning, with Owen leading the horse carefully along trails that were often barely visible. Sarah did not complain once, though he could see the pain in the tight lines around her mouth and the way she held herself rigid in the saddle. The baby slept through most of it, exhausted from his dramatic entrance into the world. When they finally emerged into the clearing where Owen's cabin stood, Sarah let out a small sound of surprise. It was larger than she had expected, solidly built from thick logs with a stone chimney and real glass in the windows. A small barn stood nearby, along with a lean-to for storing wood and a well with a bucket. Everything spoke of careful craftsmanship and a desire for permanence. "You built this yourself?" she asked as Owen helped her down from the horse, over the course of 2 years. He led her inside, where a single large room served as kitchen, bedroom, and living space, with a ladder leading up to a small loft. The furniture was simple but well made, the floors were swept clean, and everything had a place. A large stone fireplace dominated one wall, with a cooking crane and various pots and pans hanging nearby. "It is not much, but it is warm and dry." "It is wonderful," Sarah said sincerely, and Owen felt an unexpected flush of pleasure at her words. He had never particularly cared what anyone thought of his home, but somehow her approval mattered. He settled her in his own bed, the only real bed in the cabin, over her protests. "I have slept on worse than the floor," he told her gruffly. "You need to be comfortable. Doctor's orders." "You are not a doctor," Sarah pointed out, but she was smiling as she said it, close enough given the circumstances. He busied himself building up the fire and heating water. "I am going to head back for your wagon now. There is food in the larder, water in the bucket, and the door bars from the inside. Do not open it for anyone but me." "Owen," Sarah's voice stopped him at the door. "Why are you doing all this? You do not know me. You do not owe me anything." He turned to look at her, this young mother with her baby in her arms and exhaustion written into every line of her body, and tried to find words for something he did not fully understand himself. "Maybe I do not like the idea of people dying alone in the mountains when I could have done something to stop it," he said finally. "Maybe I am just tired of being alone. Does it matter?" "I suppose not," Sarah said softly, "but thank you anyway." Owen left before she could see the strange emotion in his eyes, before he had to examine too closely why those simple words affected him so deeply. He made good time back to the wagon, found the other horse had returned as well, and spent the afternoon rigging a makeshift wheel and loading everything he could onto the horses' backs. It took him 2 more trips over the next 3 days to bring all of Sarah's belongings back to his cabin, along with the repaired wagon itself, which he stored in the barn. During those 3 days, something unexpected happened. Owen found himself looking forward to returning to the cabin in a way he never had before. He would come in tired and dirty from the trail to find Sarah up and moving around, always trying to help despite her weakness, the baby sleeping in a drawer she had converted into a makeshift cradle. She cooked meals from his supplies and hers. She swept the floors and washed clothes in the big basin. She hummed those same gentle melodies he had heard the first night, and slowly the cabin began to feel less like a solitary refuge and more like a home. They talked in the evenings, sitting by the fire after dinner. Sarah told him about her life in Missouri, about her brief marriage to a man she had loved but barely known, about her fears and hopes for her son's future. Owen found himself sharing things he had not spoken of in years, about his own parents and his childhood on a small farm in Ohio, about the restlessness that had driven him west and the peace he had eventually found in these mountains. "You really do love it here," Sarah observed one night, watching the way his face changed when he talked about the wilderness. "The solitude, the freedom." "I did," Owen said, then caught himself. "I do. But maybe I have had enough solitude for a while." Sarah looked at him thoughtfully, but did not press. The baby, who she had finally named Daniel, chose that moment to wake and demand feeding, and the conversation moved on to easier topics. By the end of the first week, Sarah was moving around with much more ease, the color returning to her cheeks and strength flowing back into her limbs. Owen found himself noticing things about her he had been too busy or too disciplined to see before. The way her hair caught the light when she brushed it out in the mornings, the gentleness in her hands when she cared for Daniel, the quick intelligence in her eyes and the dry humor that surfaced when she felt comfortable enough to let it show. He was falling in love with her, he realized one morning while watching her sing to Daniel. The knowledge hit him like a physical blow, both terrifying and exhilarating. He had not planned this, had not even imagined it was possible, but there it was. In the space of a week, this woman and her child had become the center of his world, and the thought of them leaving made his chest tight with something that felt dangerously close to panic. But Sarah had made no indication that she felt anything similar. She was grateful, certainly, and friendly, but that was only natural given how much he had done for her. She still spoke sometimes of finding her late husband's brother, of making a life in Georgetown, and Owen did not know how to tell her that he wanted her to stay without sounding like he was taking advantage of her vulnerable situation. So he kept silent and tried to content himself with her presence while he had it. Sarah, for her part, was dealing with her own complicated feelings. She had been so focused on survival for so long, on getting through each day with her pregnancy and her grief and her desperate journey west, that she had not allowed herself to think about anything beyond the immediate future. But now, safe and warm in Owen's cabin with Daniel thriving in her arms, she found herself noticing the man who had saved them both. Owen was unlike anyone she had ever known. Her late husband had been slight and scholarly, always more comfortable with books than physical labor. Owen was all raw strength and quiet competence, moving through his days with an economy of motion that spoke of years of self-reliance. She had watched him split wood with an axe, his powerful shoulders and arms working with tireless efficiency, and felt something flutter in her stomach that had nothing to do with fear or grief. He was gentle with Daniel, too, which surprised her. She had expected him to be uncomfortable around the baby, the way most men were, but instead he held the tiny infant with careful confidence, talking to him in that low, rough voice about mountains and elk and the stars wheeling overhead. Watching them together made her heart ache with a longing she had thought died with her husband, but she could not impose on Owen forever. He had his own life, his own routines, and she had already disrupted everything. The fact that he seemed content with the disruption, even happy, only made her more determined not to overstay her welcome. She had made poor decisions before, trusting too quickly and paying the price, and she would not make that mistake again. 2 weeks after that terrible day in the mountains, Sarah finally broached the subject over breakfast. "I think Daniel and I are strong enough to travel to Georgetown now," she said, keeping her voice carefully neutral. "If you could help me get the wagon ready, we can be out of your way by tomorrow." Owen's hand froze halfway to his mouth, his coffee cup suspended in midair. "Out of my way," he repeated, his voice strange. "You have been so kind, but we cannot live here forever. You have your own life to get back to." Sarah focused on her plate, unable to meet his eyes. "I need to find Thomas Owens if he is still in Georgetown, or figure out what to do next if he is not. And if he is not, what then?" Owen set down his cup with more force than necessary. "You are going to live in Georgetown alone with a newborn baby. Do what exactly? Work in a saloon? Take in washing? Hope some miner decides to marry you for the convenience of an instant family?" Sarah's head snapped up, her eyes flashing with anger. "That is none of your concern. I managed before you found me, and I will manage after I leave." "You managed?" Owen's voice rose, which was unusual for him. "You were giving birth alone in a broken wagon in the middle of nowhere. You and Daniel would have died if I had not come along. That is not managing, Sarah. That is barely surviving." "Well, I am sorry to be such a burden." Sarah stood up, her chair scraping loudly against the floor. Daniel, sensing the tension, began to fuss in his cradle. I am sorry that saving my life means you feel obligated to take care of me forever. But I release you from that obligation, Owen. We will leave tomorrow and you can go back to your precious solitude. That is not what I meant. Owen stood too, his size dominating the small cabin. Damn it, Sarah, that is not what I meant at all. Then what did you mean? She was crying now, angry tears that she tried furiously to wipe away. Because from where I stand, it sounds like you think I am helpless and foolish and incapable of taking care of myself and my son. I think you are the bravest, strongest woman I have ever met, Owen said, his voice dropping to something low and intense. I think you have been through hell and come out the other side still fighting, still hoping for something better. And I think that if you leave tomorrow, I am going to regret it for the rest of my life. Sarah froze, staring at him. What? Owen ran a hand through his hair, clearly struggling with the words. I do not want you to go, I want you to stay. You and Daniel both. I want this. He gestured around the cabin, at the breakfast dishes and the cradle and all the small domestic details that had accumulated over the past 2 weeks, to be permanent. Owen, I cannot just stay here, Sarah whispered. People would talk, it would not be proper. Then marry me. The words hung in the air between them, and Owen looked as shocked as Sarah felt that he had said them. But he did not take them back. Instead, he moved closer, his hands gentle as they framed her face. Marry me, he said again, more certain this time. I know it is fast. I know you are still grieving your husband, and I am not asking you to forget him or to love me right away. But stay. Let me take care of you and Daniel. Let me be the father he needs and the husband you deserve. And maybe, someday, you could love me too. Sarah's mind was reeling. 2 weeks. She had known this man for 2 weeks. It was insane to even consider what he was proposing. But as she looked up into his weathered face at the hope and fear warring in his eyes, she realized that she already knew the answer. I already do, she said softly. Love you, I mean. I did not want to, and I do not know when it happened exactly, but I do. You are good and kind and strong, and you have given me and Daniel a home when we had nothing. How could I not love you? The smile that broke across Owen's face was like sunrise over the mountains. He bent slowly, giving her time to pull away, and kissed her with a gentleness that made her heart ache. His lips were warm and slightly chapped from the wind, and he tasted like coffee and hope. When he pulled back, he rested his forehead against hers. Is that a yes? He asked, and she could hear the smile in his voice. Yes, Sarah said, and then laughed because it felt so good to say it. Yes, I will marry you, Owen Kincaid. They were married a week later in Georgetown by a traveling preacher, with the owner of the general store and his wife standing as witnesses. Sarah wore a simple dress she had made herself from fabric Owen had bought her, and Owen wore his cleanest buckskins with his hair tied back neatly. Daniel slept through the entire ceremony in his mother's arms, occasionally making little snuffling sounds that made the small congregation smile. Afterward, Owen bought supplies for a celebration dinner and made a point of asking around about Thomas Owens. As Sarah had feared, no one in Georgetown had heard of him. If he had ever been there, he was long gone now. Sarah was surprised to find that the news did not particularly upset her. She had found something better than a brother-in-law who might or might not have helped her. She had found a man who chose to help her, who loved her and her son, and who wanted to build a life with them. The ride back to the cabin felt different this time. Sarah was no longer a temporary guest or a charity case. She was Owen's wife, and the cabin was her home. The knowledge settled over her like a warm blanket, comfortable and reassuring. That night, after Daniel was fed and sleeping soundly in the cradle Owen had built for him, they came together as husband and wife for the first time. Owen was gentle and patient, mindful of the fact that Sarah was still recovering from childbirth, and she was grateful for his consideration. But there was also passion there, a heat that surprised them both, and afterward she lay in his arms feeling more content than she had in longer than she could remember. "Tell me something," Owen said, his voice rumbling in his chest beneath her ear. "When did you know? When did you start to love me?" Sarah thought about it. "I think it was the second day after you brought us here. You were outside chopping wood and I heard you singing. It was off-key and you probably did not even realize you were doing it, but you sounded happy. And I realized that we had not made your life harder by being here. We had made it better. That is when I started to let myself hope that maybe this could be real." "I knew the first morning," Owen admitted. "I woke up and heard you humming to Daniel, and the cabin did not feel empty anymore. It felt like it had been waiting for you all along." They fell asleep like that, wrapped in each other, and when Daniel woke before dawn demanding to be fed, Owen got up with Sarah and made coffee while she nursed the baby. It felt natural and right, this small domestic rhythm, and Sarah sent up a silent prayer of thanks for the random chance that had brought Owen to her wagon that terrible afternoon. The summer passed in a blur of happiness. Sarah learned the rhythms of mountain life, helped Owen with the garden he planted, preserved food for the winter, and marveled at how strong Daniel was growing. The baby thrived in the clean mountain air, his cheeks growing round and rosy, his eyes bright and curious as he took in the world around him. Owen taught Sarah to shoot, patiently correcting her stance and her aim until she could hit a target with reasonable accuracy. "You need to be able to protect yourself and Daniel if something happens to me," he said seriously. And though Sarah hated thinking about that possibility, she recognized the wisdom in his words. They made love often, finding joy in each other's bodies and comfort in each other's arms. Sarah's figure returned to its pre-pregnancy state, and Owen never tired of telling her how beautiful she was, running his calloused hands over her skin with a reverence that made her feel cherished beyond measure. In August, they made a trip to Georgetown for supplies and ran into a woman Sarah vaguely recognized from their wedding. The woman was polite but cool, and as they walked away, she said something to her companion that made them both laugh. Sarah could not hear the words, but she could guess the content. Unwed mother, hasty marriage, living in sin in the mountains. The old gossip that followed any woman who did not fit society's narrow expectations. Owen must have seen something in her face because he took her hand and squeezed it gently. "Let them talk," he said quietly. "They do not know you. They do not know us. Their opinions do not matter." "It might matter to Daniel someday," Sarah said, "when he is older and hears stories about his mother. Then we will tell him the truth, that his mother is the bravest person I ever met, and that I am honored every day that she chose to be my wife." Owen's voice was fierce with conviction. "And if anyone tries to make him feel ashamed, they will answer to me." Sarah smiled despite her worries. Owen had become fiercely protective of both her and Daniel, something that might have felt oppressive from a different man but from him felt like safety. "You cannot fight the whole world for us." "Watch me," Owen said, and she believed he would try. As autumn painted the mountains in shades of gold and crimson, Sarah realized her monthly courses had not come. At first she attributed it to the stress of childbirth and the changes in her body, but as the signs became more obvious, she had to acknowledge the truth. She was pregnant again. The news filled her with mixed emotions. She loved Daniel fiercely and was already imagining expanding their family, but he was barely 6 months old. Another pregnancy so soon felt overwhelming. And what would Owen think? They had only been married a few months. Would he feel trapped, burdened by an instant family that kept growing? She should have known better. When she finally worked up the courage to tell him, Owen's face lit up like a child on Christmas morning. "Another baby," he repeated, as if he could not quite believe it. "Sarah, that is wonderful news. You are not upset?" she asked, searching his face. "It is so soon. We have hardly had time to adjust to Daniel." "Upset?" Owen pulled her into his arms, careful of her still flat stomach. "Sarah, every day with you and Daniel is a gift I never expected to receive. The idea of another child, a child that is ours from the beginning, is more than I ever dared to hope for." He pulled back to look at her seriously. "But how do you feel about it? You are the one who has to carry and birth this baby." "I am scared," Sarah admitted. "The last birth was so difficult, and if you had not been there—" She trailed off, not wanting to finish that thought. "I will be here for this one too," Owen promised. "And we will go to Georgetown well before your time and stay with the doctor's family if we need to. I will not take chances with your life or the baby's." But as it turned out, the winter had other plans. Snow came early and hard that year, blocking the passes and making travel impossible by late November. Sarah's belly swelled with the baby, and Owen fretted constantly about being cut off from medical help. "We managed before," Sarah reminded him, though privately she shared his concerns. "And lightning does not strike the same place twice, as they say. This birth will probably be easy and uneventful." She was half right. When her labor started on a cold February morning, it progressed quickly and normally. Owen had made elaborate preparations, boiling water and laying out clean cloths, his face set in lines of determination and barely concealed fear. But Sarah labored calmly, having been through this before, and when the pains grew strong, she bore down with confidence. Their daughter slipped into the world as the sun rose over the mountains, wailing her indignation at the cold air. Owen caught her with shaking hands, cut the cord with a steady knife, and placed her on Sarah's chest with a look of wonder that made Sarah's heart overflow. "She is perfect," he whispered, touching one tiny fist with his finger. The baby immediately grabbed on, her grip surprisingly strong, and Owen laughed with delight. "Look at that. She is a fighter already." "What should we name her?" Sarah asked, studying her daughter's little face. She had a shock of dark hair like Owen's and a stubborn set to her chin that promised future challenges. "Whatever you want," Owen said. "You did all the hard work." They settled on Margaret after Sarah's mother, with the immediate understanding that she would be called Maggie. Daniel, now 9 months old and cruising along the furniture, was fascinated by his new sister, constantly wanting to touch her and see her. Owen built a bigger cradle to accommodate both children when needed, and the cabin that had once seemed so spacious now felt crowded in the best possible way. Spring came eventually, as it always did, and with it the freedom to travel again. They made the trip to Georgetown to register Maggie's birth and stock up on supplies. Sarah noticed that the town had grown in the months since their last visit, with new buildings going up and more families arriving. The woman who had gossiped before nodded politely this time, her expression changing when she saw Owen's protective stance and the obvious love between him and Sarah. People were more willing to accept what they could see with their own eyes, Sarah realized. A strong family, 2 healthy children, a marriage built on genuine affection and respect. The whispers and speculation mattered less when confronted with the reality of their happiness. Over the next few years, life settled into a pattern that felt both comfortable and constantly evolving. Daniel grew into a sturdy boy with his mother's gray eyes and his father's love of the outdoors. Owen taught him to track animals, to read the weather, to move quietly through the forest. Maggie was more cautious but fiercely intelligent, always asking questions about everything she saw. Sarah educated them both as best she could with the few books they owned and the knowledge she had. When Daniel was 4 and Maggie was 3, Sarah found herself pregnant again. This time the news was met with joy uncomplicated by fear or uncertainty. They were experienced parents now, confident in their ability to handle whatever came. Owen had also become friendly with the doctor in Georgetown, a gruff but skilled man who had agreed to come to the cabin when Sarah's time approached, weather permitting. Their third child, a son they named Peter, arrived on a mild summer evening with the doctor in attendance and both older children sleeping soundly in the loft. It was the easiest of Sarah's 3 births, and Owen joked that they had finally gotten it right. Sarah, exhausted but happy, agreed. The cabin had to be expanded to accommodate their growing family. Owen built an additional room for himself and Sarah, giving the main room over to the children. He also constructed a proper schoolroom of sorts, with a desk and chairs he made himself, so Sarah could teach the children properly. They were too far from town for regular school, but Sarah was determined that her children would be educated. Time passed in the way it does when you are happy and busy, measured not in days but in milestones. Daniel's first successful hunt, Maggie learning to read, Peter taking his first steps. Sarah's 30th birthday, celebrated with a cake Owen learned to bake by trial and error, much to the children's amusement. Owen's 38th birthday, where Sarah gave him a new rifle she had been saving for over a year. They made the trip to Georgetown several times a year, and each time they were reminded of how much the world was changing. The mines were playing out, and many people were leaving for opportunities elsewhere. But new people were coming too, farmers and ranchers looking for land, families seeking a fresh start. The Wild West was slowly being tamed, brought under the control of law and civilization. Owen had mixed feelings about the changes. He valued his independence and his connection to the wilderness, but he also recognized the benefits of having a community nearby. When Daniel was 7, Owen and Sarah made the difficult decision to send him to school in Georgetown during the winter months, boarding with the doctor's family. It was hard on everyone, especially Sarah. But Daniel thrived with the additional education and came home each spring full of new knowledge and stories. Maggie followed 2 years later, and the cabin felt empty without them during the winter. But Sarah and Owen made the best of it, enjoying the relative quiet and the opportunity to focus on Peter, who was growing into a thoughtful, sensitive boy quite different from his more adventurous older brother. When Sarah was 35 and Owen was 43, they had their 4th and final child, another daughter they named Ruth. By this time, Daniel was 11, Maggie was 9, and Peter was 6, all old enough to help with the new baby. Ruth was welcomed with joy by the entire family, and Owen, who had worried about Sarah's health during this pregnancy given her age, relaxed once mother and daughter were both clearly thriving. 4 children, Sarah marveled one night as they lay in bed, Ruth sleeping in a cradle nearby. "When you found me in that wagon, did you ever imagine we would end up here?" "No," Owen admitted. "I thought I would help you through the birth, maybe get you safely to town, and then return to my solitary life. I never imagined that you would become the center of my whole world, or that I would be a father to 4 children." "Do you regret it?" Sarah asked, though she already knew the answer. "Do you miss the solitude and freedom you used to have?" Owen turned to face her, his hand coming up to cup her cheek. In the dim light from the dying fire, his eyes were soft with love. "Not for a single moment," he said firmly. "You and our children are the best thing that ever happened to me, Sarah. You taught me that I was not meant to be alone, that I had more to offer the world than just existing on its fringes. You gave me a family, a purpose, a reason to be the best man I can be. How could I ever regret that? Sarah kissed him, putting all her love and gratitude into the gesture. Even after nearly 13 years of marriage, the passion between them had not dimmed. If anything, it had grown deeper, enriched by shared history and genuine partnership. The years continued to unfold. Daniel grew into a young man who combined his mother's intelligence with his father's skill in the wilderness. At 18, he announced his intention to become a surveyor, mapping the wild territories that were slowly being opened to settlement. Owen was proud but concerned, knowing the dangers his son would face. Sarah was simply proud, trusting that they had raised a son capable of meeting whatever challenges came his way. Maggie surprised everyone by falling in love with medicine. After helping the doctor in Georgetown deliver a baby when she was 15, she announced her determination to become a nurse, possibly even a doctor if she could find training. It was an unusual ambition for a woman in 1887, but Sarah and Owen supported her completely. They had not raised their children to be bound by conventional expectations. Peter, at 14, was still finding his way. He loved books and poetry, spending hours reading anything he could get his hands on. Owen worried sometimes that the boy was too sensitive for the harsh world, but Sarah reminded him that the world needed poets and dreamers as much as it needed hunters and fighters. Ruth, at 8 years old, was the wild card. She had inherited her father's love of the mountains and her mother's fierce determination, resulting in a child who was constantly climbing trees, exploring caves, and bringing home injured animals to nurse back to health. Owen delighted in her adventurous spirit, while Sarah tried not to have a heart attack every time Ruth attempted something new and potentially dangerous. One evening in late spring, with all the children present for once, Sarah stood in the doorway of their expanded cabin and simply watched her family. Owen was showing Peter how to carve, their dark heads bent together over a piece of wood. Daniel was telling Maggie about his latest surveying job, his hands moving expressively as he described the terrain. Ruth was playing with a family of kittens whose mother she had adopted, her laughter bright and unrestrained. This was her life, Sarah thought. This beautiful, chaotic, imperfect, perfect life that had grown from a single desperate moment in a broken wagon. She thought sometimes about the young woman she had been, terrified and alone, convinced she and her baby would die in those mountains. That woman could never have imagined this future, this abundance of love and family. Owen looked up and caught her watching, his weathered face creasing into the smile that was reserved just for her. Even after all these years, that smile could still make her heart skip. He stood and crossed to her, wrapping his arms around her waist from behind and resting his chin on her shoulder. "What are you thinking about?" he asked quietly. "Everything," Sarah said. "How far we have come, how lucky we are, how grateful I am that you did not just walk past that wagon. I heard you screaming. There was no way I could walk past that." Owen's arms tightened around her. "But I am grateful too. Grateful that you trusted me enough to let me help, that you were brave enough to marry me, that you chose to build this life with me." "You are still the bravest person I know, Sarah." "We are brave together," Sarah corrected. She turned in his arms to face him properly. "You were brave too, Owen. You could have taken the easy path, helped me to town, and left me there. Instead, you opened your heart to me and Daniel, and you have been the father he needed, the father all our children need. That took courage." "I love you," Owen said simply. "I loved you then, and I love you now, and I will love you until the day I die. You are the best thing that ever happened to me." "I love you too," Sarah replied, and meant it with every fiber of her being. That night, after the children were all asleep, Owen and Sarah sat outside under the stars as they often did. The mountains loomed dark against the sky, the same mountains where they had found each other nearly 15 years ago. So much had changed since then, but some things remained constant. The stars, the mountains, and the love between them. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if I had not been tracking elk that day?" Owen asked. "If I had gone a different direction or left a day earlier or later?" "Sometimes," Sarah admitted. "But then I remember that I do not believe in coincidences." "I think we were meant to find each other, Owen. Some things are just meant to be." "I like that," Owen said. The idea that all of this, he gestured at the cabin, at the life they had built together, was somehow written in the stars. "Or in the mountains," Sarah added with a smile. "These mountains that you love so much, they brought us together. They are part of our story." "They are," Owen agreed. He stood and pulled Sarah to her feet, leading her in a slow dance to music only they could hear. They swayed together under the starlight. Two people who had found each other against impossible odds and built something real and lasting. As the years continued their inevitable march, Sarah and Owen grew older but not apart. Their hair grayed, their bodies showed the wear of hard living and hard work, but their love remained strong. They watched their children grow into adults, helped them navigate their own challenges and triumphs, and eventually welcomed grandchildren into their lives. Daniel married a surveyor's daughter and had 3 children of his own. Maggie achieved her dream and became a nurse, eventually marrying a doctor and practicing medicine alongside him. Peter published a book of poetry that earned modest success and married a schoolteacher who shared his love of literature. Ruth, true to form, married a rancher and had 5 wild, adventurous children who kept everyone on their toes. Through it all, Owen and Sarah remained each other's anchor and compass. They had built a legacy together, not just in their children but in the way they had lived their lives. With courage, with love, with a fierce determination to protect and nurture their family, no matter what challenges arose. On their 25th wedding anniversary, Owen surprised Sarah with a gift. It was a carved wooden plaque, beautifully detailed, that read, "Here Owen Kincaid found his heart, and Sarah Owens found her home. Built 1862. Family established 1873. I am going to hang it over the door," Owen explained as Sarah traced the letters with her fingers, tears streaming down her face. "So everyone who comes here knows that this place is special, that something important happened here." "Something important happens here every day," Sarah said. "Every morning when we wake up together, every meal we share, every night when we hold each other. This house is full of important moments, Owen. It always has been." "Then we will fill it with more," Owen promised, and he kept that promise. Even as the 19th century gave way to the 20th, even as the world changed in ways they could never have imagined when they were young, Owen and Sarah's love remained constant. They had earned their happiness through trial and perseverance, through choosing each other every single day, and it showed in the comfortable way they moved around each other, the unspoken communication that came from decades of partnership. On a spring morning in 1906, Sarah woke in their bed and turned to find Owen watching her with the same expression of wonder he had worn on their wedding night 33 years earlier. He was 68 years old now, his hair completely silver, his body showing the inevitable signs of age, but to Sarah he was still the most handsome man she had ever known. "Good morning," she said, her voice still husky with sleep. "Why are you awake so early?" "I was thinking about that day," Owen said. "The day I found you." "You think about that often," Sarah observed, moving closer to him. "Because it changed everything," Owen replied. He reached out to tuck a strand of gray hair behind her ear. "I was existing before that day, Sarah." just surviving, going through the motions. But that scream, your scream, it woke something up in me. It made me remember what it meant to be human, to connect with another person, to have something worth protecting. You gave me back my life. You saved mine, Sarah countered. Literally and figuratively. I would have died in that wagon if you had not come along. Daniel and I both would have. And even if we had somehow survived, what kind of life would we have had? But you gave us a home, a family, love. You chose to be Daniel's father when you had no obligation to do so. That is the greatest gift anyone has ever given me. He is my son in every way that matters, Owen said fiercely. All of them are. Daniel, Maggie, Peter, Ruth, they are all mine, and they are all ours. They are, Sarah agreed. She kissed him softly, savoring the familiar taste and feel of him. We did well, Owen. We built something good. We did, Owen said, and I would do it all again in a heartbeat. They rose and dressed, moving through their morning routine with the ease of long practice. Their children and grandchildren would be arriving later for a big family gathering, one of the frequent celebrations that filled their lives now. The cabin had been expanded so many times over the years that it was more of a compound now, with additional buildings to accommodate their growing family when they all came together. As Sarah prepared breakfast, she looked around at the home she and Owen had built and felt a deep sense of contentment. The scars from her difficult past had healed, transformed into wisdom and strength. The terrified young woman giving birth alone in a broken wagon was gone, replaced by a grandmother, a matriarch, a woman who had loved and been loved in return. Owen came up behind her and wrapped his arms around her waist, just as he had done thousands of times before. I love you, Sarah Kincaid, he whispered into her ear. I love you too, Owen Kincaid, Sarah replied. Always and forever. And when their family arrived later that day, filling the house with noise and laughter and life, Sarah and Owen stood together and watched it all with grateful hearts. 4 children, 17 grandchildren, and 1 great-grandchild on the way. A legacy of love that had started with a scream in the wilderness and a stranger brave enough to answer it. Years continued to pass, bringing both joy and sorrow as they always do. They lost friends to age and illness, watched the world change in ways both wonderful and troubling, and felt the weight of their own mortality growing heavier. But through it all, they had each other. Owen was 73 when his heart finally began to fail. He fought it as long as he could, refusing to be confined to bed, insisting on still doing chores and helping around the homestead. But eventually, even his iron will could not overcome the limitations of his body. Sarah nursed him tenderly, bringing him soup and reading to him, holding his hand through the long nights. I am not afraid, Owen told her one evening as they sat together watching the sunset paint the mountains in shades of gold and pink. I've had a good life, Sarah. A better life than I ever deserved. I have been loved by the most remarkable woman I ever met, and I got to be a father and grandfather to an amazing family. What more could any man ask for? You could ask for more time, Sarah said, her voice breaking. I am not ready to lose you. I know. Owen squeezed her hand gently. But when the time comes, you have to let me go. You have to keep living, keep being strong for our family. Promise me, Sarah. Promise me you will not stop living just because I am gone. I promise, Sarah whispered, though she did not know how she would keep that promise. Owen Kincaid died on a quiet morning in October of 1911, surrounded by his wife and children, with his grandchildren playing in the yard outside. His last words were, I love you, directed at Sarah, and his last expression was one of peace. He was 73 years old, and he had lived every single day of those years with purpose and love. Sarah grieved deeply for the man who had been her partner for 38 years, but she kept her promise to him. She continued to live, continued to be there for her family, continued to find joy in the simple pleasures of life. Daniel moved back to the homestead to help her manage things, and Maggie visited frequently to check on her health. The cabin that had once been a solitary refuge for one man was now the heart of a sprawling family, and Sarah took comfort in that. She lived for another 12 years, dying peacefully in her sleep at the age of 79 in 1923. Her children and grandchildren gathered for her funeral, sharing stories about her strength, her courage, her unwavering love for their father and for all of them. They buried her next to Owen on a hill overlooking the homestead, where they could watch over the land they had loved together. On their shared headstone, Daniel had carved the words his father had once told him. Here 2 souls found each other in the wilderness and built a love that lasted forever. And in a way, it did last forever. The homestead remained in the family, passed down through the generations. Great-grandchildren and great-great-grandchildren played in the same forests where Owen had once hunted, swam in the same streams where he had taught his children to fish. The cabin stood strong, a testament to his skill as a builder and to the love that had filled its rooms. The story of how Owen and Sarah met became family legend, told and retold at gatherings and holidays. How a mountain man out tracking elk heard a woman scream and answered it. How he delivered her baby in a broken wagon in the middle of nowhere. How he brought them to his cabin and fell in love with them both. How he became the father Daniel needed and the husband Sarah deserved. How they built a family and a legacy together, starting from nothing but determination and love. It was a love story for the ages, born in the wild mountains of Colorado in an era when life was hard and survival was never guaranteed. But it proved that even in the harshest circumstances, even when everything seems hopeless, love can bloom. 2 people can find each other against impossible odds and build something beautiful that lasts long after they are gone. Owen had been right all those years ago. Some things are meant to be, and he and Sarah were always meant to find each other, to love each other, to create a family together. The mountains had brought them together, and their love had transformed both of their lives completely in the end. That is what mattered. Not the hardship they had endured, not the challenges they had overcome, but the love they had shared and the family they had created. Owen Kincaid and Sarah Owens had lived and loved fully, and their story would be remembered for generations to come, a testament to the power of courage, compassion, and choosing to answer when someone calls for help in the wilderness.